Ontario's unemployment rate sits at 7.4%, with the youth unemployment rate sitting closer to 20%. One solution often advanced to address this joblessness: entrepreneurship. Joining us now to help determine how much this answers the joblessness problem, University of Toronto professor Rafael Gomez. He is co-author of the upcoming book, Small Business and the City: The Transformative Potential of Small-Scale Entrepreneurship. Sarah Prevet is here. She is co-founder of Brand Project, which aims to help entrepreneurs launch new products both online and through traditional retail. And Kirk Simpson, co-founder and CEO of Wave, an integrated online solution designed for small businesses to manage their financial life. And we welcome all of you here to our studios, makeshift as they may be, in Leaside, Ontario. Nice to have you all here. Can I start with you and ask you, just give us the handy-dandy basic definition of your typical entrepreneur. Who is it?
Sure. It's not that easy for two reasons. One, it's our own perceptions of what an entrepreneur is that gets in the way. When you say define an entrepreneur, we tend to think of Mark Zuckerberg and the kind of quick, fast-rising tech startups that Silicon Valley has dominated the news with over the last decade or more.
Would that be inaccurate? It's
not inaccurate. See, the key thing with an entrepreneur is it's a multi-dimensional construct. And so there isn't a single definition that would capture what an entrepreneur is. Having said that, we know what it isn't. You're not a paid employee. You are someone who's taken a risk, often a substantial risk in time, effort, if not money. You have tried to find an opportunity that no one else has thought of, often, but not necessarily. An entrepreneur can also be someone doing something in a very traditional stream, someone opening up a mechanic shop to service a need that's missing in a market.
So you can run a bakery and be an entrepreneur.
You can definitely run a bakery, and that's the misnomer. People think entrepreneurship only means this innovative technology sort of class of startup. And in fact, entrepreneurship is really a more broadly defined group of people in the economy who aren't paid employees.
Do they share a particular demographic background?
Yeah, so studies of entrepreneurship, which includes this bigger swath of individuals who start a business, and includes some factors. So one of the factors that is relevant, is highly predictive of whether you start a business, is age. The very young tend not to start businesses.
What's very young in your view?
Well, the entry in the labor market, we tend to define labor market participants as being 16 to 65, right? So 16 to 25-year-olds are very rare in the demographic part of the entrepreneurship. Yeah, you tend to be in your mid-30s. That's the peak age when people start a business.
Are you more likely male or female?
Depends which entrepreneurial profession you get in. It's segregated, so there's certain types of entrepreneurship opportunities that are heavily male-dominated and others that are more female-dominated. In general, there are more males that start businesses than females. But one of the key things that you can observe, because it's not written on someone's face, is a family history. So you're more likely to start a business if some family member or close family member had also started a business. So there's some social capital and knowledge about business starting, or perhaps your attitude towards a startup, that is carried over from one generation to the next. One quick story related to this. One of my former colleagues did a study of the Soviet Union, or Russia, when the Soviet Union collapsed and ostensibly market capitalism sort of opened up in the new Soviet Union. He traced families that had had businesses prior to the Soviet time, so from 1917 to 1990, effectively no private ownership. And he found that there was a higher rate of business startup amongst the second or third generation, in some cases, of these same families. So there's this carryover of a family knowledge of a business that is a big predictor, although you can't observe it unless you do a detailed survey or something.
Okay, let me go to the other side of the table. And I gave you both glowing introductions, lengthy as they were, describing in chapter and verse what you do. But now we're actually going to find out what you do. So Sarah, what do you do?
Well, I was a serial entrepreneur, and so I've started.
Stopping you already. A serial entrepreneur?
A serial entrepreneur. It's not as terrifying as it sounds.
What does it mean?
Well, I've started a few businesses, and so mostly in the digital space, Sprouter and BetaKit, both media publications. And now I'm actually investing, and so I am part of a partnership where we actually invest in early stage companies, both here in Canada and in the US.
How much skin you got in the game?
Well, we all invested into the fund, and we also raised outside capital, and so we do have skin in the game.
I just noticed you didn't put a number on any of that. How much skin you got in the game?
So we're investing around $12 million, and so we tend to write check sizes around $300,000 to $500,000.
You got that much money?
Well, collectively, yes.
You collect that much money.
Yes.
You're out there beating the bushes to find it.
Well, we actually already found it, so we actually invest that money and put that directly into companies to help them grow. Can
you describe some of the ventures that you're into?
Sure. So, I mean, here in Canada specifically, we've invested in great Canadian companies. Very excited about one in particular in Montreal called Live, Love, Snack. Steven Singer is another serial entrepreneur. He did a great company called Glutino, which was actually a great Canadian company that grew and successfully exited. And so now he's back and trying to take on the healthy snack market.
So Glutino was a healthy snack. And
Glutino was actually gluten-free food, and this is his new company, Live, Love, Snack, which is now available in stores, is healthy takes on a variety of snack categories.
And you used another expression there. He said he did it, he brought it to market, and then he successfully exited?
Yeah, so he sold his company and is now looking to repeat his success with Live, Love, Snack.
Okay. Kirk, what do you do?
About 5 years ago, my co-founder and I, James Lockery, started a company called Wave. It is a software company, so it's a technology-based company, and it makes software to help small businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs around the globe, run their business more effectively.
What's a small business?
We would define that as being 9 employees or less, and about 94% of businesses in North America are in that size.
What percent, sorry?
94.
94% of small businesses.
Correct.
So the corner store, for example.
Correct.
Would they have use for your application that you're talking
Absolutely.
about? They would?
Yeah.
So what does it do?
So it allows for invoicing, accounting, payroll, all of the back office tasks that generally small business owners despise doing. It helps automate a lot of that and make their life easier so they know how they're doing day to day. Okay,
and is the idea behind, do you do what you do because you want to change the world? Is that what it's about?
I think that's a very, there's some of that for sure, but I think every entrepreneur has different ambitions and different things that drive them to make the decision. So for me, as an example, I started my first business in my early 20s because I realized I couldn't learn at school.
So you were not part of the typical demographic that Raphael just described, being in your early 20s.
That's exactly right. Albeit failed quickly, so I might have learned that lesson, the hard way. But so I think everybody's different. So in my early 20s, it was because I wanted to learn the hard way. I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to sort of learn the experiences instead of being in the classroom, learn them by doing it. In my mid-30s, when I started Wave, it was all about wanting to be around innovative, creative people who wanted to move the needle every day. I had worked in a big business before and been around the meeting room table where everybody's kind of trying to defer the tough decisions or take on the big projects. And I wanted to do the exact opposite, which was be in an environment where everybody wanted to take that challenge, where we wanted to take risk, where we wanted to literally move the needle every single day. And that's what really drew me to start the business.
Sarah, in Canada, we have, I think there's this aspect of our business culture that really fears failure. Whereas in other countries around the world, if you're not failing, you're not trying. Is that frustrating for you?
I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this because in some cases I really detest, when we sort of celebrate failure and sort of aspire for failure and things, but I do think that there is a part of entrepreneurship that is deeply entrenched in failure. You're going to make mistakes, you have to keep iterating and evolving, and it doesn't matter what type of business you're in or what type of entrepreneur you are, you're going to have to persevere through really difficult times, and I think the acknowledgement of that in our culture is really important, and also important in the education system in terms of encouraging kids to try and not to be afraid of failure and to have a culture that embraces experimentation and trying and constantly iterating off of ideas.
And let me also follow up on the male versus female angle that Raphael mentioned earlier, and that is, it is mostly a male-dominated thing, right?
Oh, well,
Do you find that?
So, I mean, sadly, yes, but I think that there's some really positive trends, and we're seeing a lot of really exciting companies that are being driven by women. And specifically here in Toronto, I'm very excited about Interaxon, which is, again, led by a female founder. We're seeing more.
What is that?
A founder?
No, sorry.
I was like, well,
The founder I know.
Okay.
Interaxon?
So Interaxon is a really interesting technology where they're actually pioneering brain sensing technology. It's a headband, and so right now their current use case is to actually teach people how to calm their minds. And so it's really exciting, and it's really on the forefront of this kind of technology. And they've received significant investment. They're doing great things and continue to expand. But we're also seeing women come in from the investment side. So we're seeing more and more of the investment firms in various levels bring on women partners, and I think that's really important for the ecosystem.
Put a percentage on it, though. Those who, those efforts led by men versus those efforts led by women is what percentage?
Well, I don't have a number to put on it. I can
not
only sort of tell you
50-50 though,
it's
is it?
certainly not 50-50 at this point, but it is a positive trend, and hopefully it's one that we can continue to develop.
I think we have a long way to go in the technology sector. I think in the broader economy, we're seeing a lot more women start business, which is fantastic. We have a long way to go in the technology sector.
When you hear these stories, and of course you've studied others as well, have you come to any conclusions about why it is that Canadians seem to be so much more risk averse in the entrepreneurship field compared to other jurisdictions in the world?
Sure. Well, there's a political culture dimension. We were founded on certain principles that are quite different from our neighbor to the south.
It's 150 years ago, though.
Those persist.
They
Those
do.
are called, there's path dependency, is the technical term we use, but they're just legacy effects. I mean, you think the American Revolution created two countries, not one. And it's interesting, we call it the American Revolution, they call it the War of Independence.
Right.
So we're founded on a principle of settlers who rejected revolution, who rejected a new way, and we're kind of happy having the old system stick around. Those present legacies that are kind of entrenched. So that's in our deep political culture. Having said that, I think Canadians do strike a nice balance in many ways, because if you want to start a business in Canada, the good thing about being in a risk-averse kind of culture is that the rules are pretty transparent and aren't subject to radical change and arbitrary change. For a business person, that's actually very good, because it's uncertainty that, it's funny because, yes, entrepreneurs embrace risk and uncertainty, but they need the system around them to actually be kind of predictable. They need to know that their property rights are enforced, their legal control over an entity is not going to be subject to revocation. Those things are something that Canadians have and we should be proud of. And it's kind of why our major cities are such hubs for entrepreneurship historically. Immigrants, perhaps not so subject and tied to the norms that we have, perhaps as native-born Canadians, are often the ones that set up businesses. And we have a relatively transparent and easy way to start up a business. I agree with you, we have a culture that's different from our neighbors in the South. But having said that, compared to other countries, it's actually a good place to start a business.
Canada is a good place to start a business.
In our urban environments, for sure.
When I was growing up, you know what the joke was, right?
No.
You want to know how to start a small business in Canada?
Yeah.
Open a large one, wait a year. That's what they used to say. They don't say that anymore? It's now a better place?
I think what you're talking about is a generational shift. In the 60s, that was when Canada still had that norm. I think after the 60s, with the opening up of immigration from so many different parts of the world, our major cities act as hubs for startup and entrepreneurship. And often, it's people that are closed off from the labor market. I come at this from the labor market side. People who start a business often do so because they're prevented from getting a paid job. I'm not presuming to know your age, but I bet when you started your own business in your early 20s, the labor market wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders and offering jobs. So entrepreneurship
pick up on that. Let me pick up on that.
Yeah.
But before I do it, you said something a few minutes ago that I also wanted to follow up on, so I'm going to do two follow-ups here. You're in the market for $500,000, right, for some of these ventures, is that right? Where do you even begin to go to find that kind of money?
So when we actually raise funds, we're raising from typically high net worth individuals, but as well as other institutions. So the BDC is actually also a backer of our fund.
Okay, and how about you?
In terms of where did we find the initial capital?
Where do you get your money?
So I think in Canada, for most startups, the first $1 million of funding is the most difficult by a factor of 100. I was literally walking down the street one day, ran into my neighbor, and he ended up investing and bringing others into the fold as well.
How much would he have invested based on that chance encounter?
$100,000.
Really?
I need to go to my mailbox.
Yeah, exactly. But it's those kinds of chance encounters that sometimes lead to good results. But you know, when we had traction in the company, when we were seeing success, it became much easier to raise even $5 or $12 million than it was that original 500,000.
But I'm guessing you raise more in the U.S. than Canada, or it's easier to raise more in the U.S. than Canada.
Typically for the larger check sizes, when you are a technology company and proving traction, it's easier to raise the large checks in the U.S. than it is in Canada.
Sarah, you find that?
You know, a couple of years ago, I probably would have argued that. I've really seen a lot of activity in Canada as of late, and I think it's a really positive thing. I actually think it is an amazing time to start a business in Canada, specifically in Ontario, and specifically in Toronto at the moment, and in Waterloo. And we're seeing more and more people who are writing checks, and even at an early stage, I think we're seeing a lot of high net worth individuals who are actually coming out of the fold and saying, oh, I can invest. I think, you know, we, especially in the tech ecosystem, I mean, we always sort of had this term, angel investors. And that's maybe not a term that everybody at home would understand, but that's really people who are private individuals who want to put money into a company, right, in exchange for equity. And so we're seeing more and more people as startups sort of get this sexiness, right? I mean, people are talking about startups. This was not the case several years ago where there was all this hype that we have now. And so I think people are really interested in participating in the space, specifically in tech, and we're seeing more and more smaller check sizes. And so that first $1 million, which was probably very difficult to get, you know, several years ago, is probably more easily accessible today. And then that next round of financing, where you can get you know, a check size of $500,000, maybe outside of your friends and family, is probably accessible. I think there is a little bit of a gap right now in the market in Ontario between that sort of that secondary sort of maybe like an early Series A and your Series B, where you would take institutional cash at some of the levels that, you know, Kirk has taken, you know, in the millions of dollars. I think we're still working to fill that gap, but you have funders like Omer's and other people who are coming in and they're writing checks, and that's a really positive thing.
Omer's, this is the Ontario Municipal Employees, whatever RS stands for.
I'm glad someone else can figure out the acronym.
Yeah,
I don't know.
whatever it is, something like that. Yeah, big pool of money.
They started a venture fund probably 4 years ago, and it's been, as Sarah mentioned, really a great thing for the ecosystem to have a Canadian firm writing large check sizes.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to get you guys in here, of course, is because we put the stats off the top. The unemployment rate among young people in this province right now is almost 3 times higher than the general unemployment rate. That's a disaster if you're a young person looking for a job today. And I know, for example, we've had Sheldon Levy, the president of Ryerson, on this program in the past, who has said, the future is not going to be graduate and look for a job. The future is going to be graduate and create your own job through entrepreneurship. And I want to get a better sense of how possible that is to do. So can we get into some discussion about that? What's your view on that?
Sure. So I think there's been a lot of conversation about millennials and, you know, how they fit into the workforce and some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, et cetera. I can only speak for, you know, our firsthand experience, where we bring on a lot of young people in their first career, both in our support structure to support our users, as well as in engineering. And we've had phenomenal success bringing really talented, competitive, imaginative young people into Wave. And
where do you get them from?
All over the place, to be honest. Their background is varied. Some of them are just out of university, some didn't go to university, very varied. And you know, over the last 3 or 4 years, they've become some of our best people in UX design, in project management, all of this kind of stuff. So I'm bullish on these kinds of people coming into the workforce and using their unique skills to sort of better themselves and make a future for themselves. I do think, though, that you know, we are not graduating enough engineers. I mean, if you're coming out of University of Waterloo or U of T and you're an engineer, I mean, your future is paved in gold, practically. You've got lots of opportunities in Canada. You've got lots of opportunities in Silicon Valley. So, you know, for young people to take that path, if that's right for them, there is just a ton of opportunity coming out of that space.
Sarah, what do you see in terms of don't look for a job, make yourself a job?
Well, so I mean, there's two things I want to touch upon. I mean, one, I think there are roles still to be found, and to Kirk's point, I mean, engineering, design. I mean, there's a shortage in so many of these fields where, you know, successful startups that have now grown into great Canadian companies are looking to employ people in these various roles, and they just can't find them. And so certainly, I think maybe the education system needs to catch up to sort of, and people need to be looking at where the opportunities are in the marketplace. But secondly, I do think entrepreneurship is a wonderful career choice, and one that we need to give more visibility to. And I think university is far too late. Personally, I'd like to see entrepreneurship and design thinking and innovation and teaching creativity at an elementary school level, and I would like to see that program continued through high school. It should be just as much of a viable career choice as being a doctor, being a nurse, being a lawyer, whatever the professions are that we sort of tend to see in our own realms. And hopefully, as you know, we have all of this hype right now around startups and people talking about things, that's increasing the visibility for young people. But I think teaching basic resourcefulness and encouraging people to think outside of the box, to be imaginative, and to depend on themselves is only going to be a good thing, whether or not you start a company.
Well, this is one of the great, I'm glad you put this way, because this hits on one of the great questions I think we've got to consider here today, which is entrepreneurs, Raphael, are born or they are educated?
Right.
Which is it?
Both. And just to not shift the focus, but draw the focus in on another class of entrepreneurship. We've been focusing on tech, startup, graduating engineers, and this question that Sheldon Levy posed, we're going to have to make our jobs when we graduate. I don't think it's that easy. In fact, it's a different focus, which is, look, young workers need experience. They need to find out what they want. I agree that some sort of attempt to show that there are opportunities beyond classically defined professions is a good thing. And that's kind of explains why a lot of sons and daughters of entrepreneurs and small business owners become small business owners themselves, because they've had that experience so young. And if you could draw the experience into those who have not that exposure, it's good. But the question that you posed about, are they made or born? I think it is both. It's exposure, it's your environmental conditions when you're growing up. It's like working part-time at your father's, shop or mother's shop when, you're not at school. You pick up on certain things that later in life help you if you so desire to create your business. But just interestingly enough, in this sort of research that I did on cities and small business and the integral role that small business plays in defining a city, making it vibrant, but also how cities create the conditions to create more small business. We did a study of a particular neighborhood in Toronto, in the East End, not far from here. It's Wexford. It's where I grew up.
Scarborough.
Scarborough, exactly. And they'd set up a BIA, Business Improvement Area, not too long ago when I'd done the study, and just cataloging how many employees does each business employ. And there are about 250 small firms, but 4 or 5 was the average. 4.5. When you calculate the number that these small businesses employed along that stretch of Lawrence Avenue East, it was probably more than what was employed in the Walmart, which was down the street on Eglinton with these big box stores. The collective impact of these small businesses in a community, even if they're not at the innovative edge, but they're providing a local service, is so important. And here's the rub. They hire young people. Because a large firm asks for 5 years experience. Where do you get the 5 years experience? It's a small firm, a young firm that employs young people. And there have been studies done by economists saying that the rate of new entrepreneurial firm creation has gone down, which is one reason why youth are finding it so hard to break into the labor market. They can't get these first jobs in these new firms.
Well, let me ask these guys. Kirk, did you take entrepreneurial classes in post-secondary education, anything like that?
No.
Nothing?
No.
So you're a born entrepreneur?
Sure. I don't really know. I think it just feels natural for some people, and I think one of the key traits of any entrepreneurs is a positivity towards what the future looks like, because you're going to get knocked down so many times. It's a question of how do we build that resilience into our youth, where they get themselves back up and keep going. And I wonder how much that is. I know that's what helps myself and my co-founder is we have lots of down days, but you quickly sort of shake it off and say, okay, let's get back at it.
Any entrepreneurial formal education in your background?
Not formal, but to that point, do I think it would have been of assistance? Absolutely. And so, I was lucky enough as a teenager to be exposed to a great entrepreneur, and that was sort of what set me down the path, right? I got exposure.
Who was it?
It was Joel McLean. He's the founder of Infotech Research Group, and so they're still a big firm. It's, that kind of exposure gives you that kind of visibility into opportunity. But, we always come down to this nature versus nurture debate, and it drives me crazy, because really what we need to be doing is nurturing the nature. You find kids who have, any sort of ambition, motivation, spark, right? That X factor, and you nurture the shit out of it. Sorry, TVO. You nurture it. And so you need to make sure that...
Is that a technical term?
Entrepreneur.
Yeah, right.
You need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to give the foundational skills to increase the likelihood of success for those types of people who show that type of ambition.
But there's lots of people out there who are hoping that nurturing this spark will be the solution to our unemployment woes.
Absolutely.
Can you see it being that significant?
Absolutely, I can. I mean, even if you look at entrepreneurship, and so we've touched on this a little bit, it's not just about the tech sector. It's across all these verticals. It goes to the mom and pop shops on the corner, and they're employing people. And it's not just the company and their direct employees, it's also the ancillary services that surround that business, right? And so whether it be, the accounting services that you leverage, the bookkeeper, down the street, your lawyer, all these things, that just starting a company has all of these different effects on the economy, things that you sort of wouldn't think about in that first initial blush.
Sorry, Kirk, but I just want to back up that piece of observation. Glazer and Kerr, Ed Glazer is sort of now well-known economist who studied cities and has promoted agglomeration in the building of high-rise condos, because getting lots of people together is a great way to sell services in a low-cost way for small firms. Right, because the distances are small, all these sort of transaction costs, as economists refer to them, are very low, and that's exactly what they found. They looked at a study of over 100 municipal areas in the United States, and they found the cities that had the larger concentration of small, independently, locally based companies grew at a far faster rate than those cities that had instead larger, multinational-based enterprises. So the more vibrant entrepreneurial cities over time grew faster and had lower unemployment rates. You're able to withstand a global shock if you have a resilient local economy.
Sure.
But if your large-scale manufacturer closes down, they will move to Mexico and you're left with nothing.
Then you are, I think as you put it, you are SOL at that point. If I can build on what you just said. You wanted to add?
Well, just about the comment about how do we nurture young people to be entrepreneurs, I think one of the things that you'll always hear about Silicon Valley is that there is a real sense of community from entrepreneurs giving back to other entrepreneurs. And I think that's something that is beginning to foster in Toronto. And to Sarah's point of she was inspired by another entrepreneur, I think the more that we can nurture young people by giving back and helping their journey, and that becomes built into the community, the better we'll all be. So it doesn't necessarily have to be at the post-secondary sort of education level. I think it can also be within the community itself.
Having said that, to
Yes.
play devil's advocate,
Do it.
Not everyone can be an entrepreneur. They are a tail in the distribution, right? They aren't the bulk of people. So you still need large employers who, for lack of a better word, provide more steady, predictable employment, so that these smaller entrepreneurs can actually feed off of the consumption power of these stable, not so precarious jobs. So the key thing is a mix. It's a balance. It's not an extreme version of we need only large enterprises, small businesses, the benefits are overblown, or the opposite, which is only entrepreneurial culture. We don't need large firms. You need both.
Can I ask you about one of the most controversial planets in the galaxy at the moment?
Please
Yeah,
do.
she's wondering, what is he talking about? I'm talking about Mars.
Right.
This is at the corner, well, this is across the road from Queen's Park, basically, in downtown Toronto. Started as medical and related sciences. It was supposed to be a kind of opportunity to cluster a lot of very futuristic businesses together. And it has recently emerged that the government of Ontario has to go in there and bail it out to the tune of several $100 million because it isn't doing enough, I guess, of what the government hoped it would do. You have experience with Mars?
I do, yes.
Tell us about it.
So I think the idea of Mars is a very good thing. I went in there early on really in the hopes of helping to find direction, contacts, learnings, etc. And I found some of it, and I think it's a very nuanced story for me. So they put me in touch with a particular gentleman who was phenomenal for me as it relates to helping me tell the story, helping me to be succinct, to present to investors, all of those kinds of things. Help I really needed at that particular time. And so that was really good. I think one of my biggest concerns about Mars is that in startups we try to foster a very transparent culture. And I think the biggest thing that Mars is suffering from right now is they're taking the very opposite end of that spectrum and being very non-transparent about what they do and their successes and their failures. We as startups fail all the time, and we embrace it. As Sarah mentioned before, there's pros and cons to that. But I think my problem is that they're highlighting firms like ours, for instance, as a success story of somebody who's raised $25 million, but their impact on us was very, very low. And so using that as a poster child of their success, to me, is not as transparent as I'd like them to be.
Misleading, you think?
That's one way of characterizing it. I just think that there's a lot of good work that's being done there. And I think if they would stop trying to justify the funds and instead tell the story of what needs to happen in the community. I think there's a great example in Waterloo of Communitech that's doing a very good job of it. And when you talk to people about their experience with Communitech, it's very, very different than their experience with Mars. And I think we need to look at some of that.
Just to follow up, how much of the $25 million would you say Mars was responsible for helping you realize?
Well, this is the nuanced story, right? Because who knows whether or not I would have got to that next stage without them. But in terms of direct access to capital, none. But that's where the nuance is.
Communitech is very well known. We did programs out in Communitech, actually. Would you call that a big success?
I'd call both Communitech and Mars a success, personally. I'm a big fan of both organizations, and I think it's an important part of the ecosystem to have a center that's focused on innovation and bringing all of the different parties to the table, right? Because it's, to an earlier point, it's not just about the entrepreneurs and the startups. It's also around access to mentorship. It's also around access to big corporations, bringing together people who are solving different problems from different angles. And I think, Kirk has a very personal story with Mars. I think that Mars has very different aspects to it in terms of outside capital, but also in terms of the early mentorship that he found. I think that they do a phenomenal job, and I think that there's a lot of companies who owe their early success in terms of finding connections and finding their place in the ecosystem to people at Mars.
One of the knocks on, well, I don't know if you can call it a knock on Mars, it may be a knock on the idea. It's an agency of the Ontario government, or has an affiliation with the Ontario government, right? And it's funded by the Ontario government, which means that the level of scrutiny and the level of, you're not allowed to fail because then you're blowing taxpayers' money, in which case is the whole idea somewhat flawed because, unlike what we've been talking about here today, you can't fail there because it ends up on the front page of the Star if you fail.
Listen, I'm not going to speak to a witch hunt that's been put on by the papers because I think
You think that's what it is, though?
Yeah, well, I mean, I read a lot of the media that came out, and I kept looking for, okay, so what was the issue? And so I think that there's there's an expectation of transparency and accountability that we're going to have of any organization, and certainly we need to have that of Mars and of Communitech. But the reality is, we also need to tell the other side of the story, and that's how many startups are being helped on a day-to-day basis inside those walls, and how many community events that happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. And it's a gathering spot, and I really don't know a single startup in the city who hasn't been in some way affected by the community there.
This is the nuance of the story, right? Because the idea of it is good. They're doing a lot of good work. They got tangled in this real estate play. I think they got tangled in reports that they had put out that they wouldn't back up or have access to the data. I think they got tangled up with some of the salaries that are being paid there. All of those kinds of things that really takes away from the core work that they're doing. And I put value on that core work, a lot of value.
The mission is good, you think?
Exactly right. Some of the way that it's come out over the last 12 months and some of the way that I think the people that are employed there are not necessarily, they don't have a lot of startup experience. And when you haven't been through the trenches yourself, you don't really know how to particularly understand the pain that people are going through on any given day. But there's a lot of good things that are happening there, and we shouldn't take away from that. We should just improve on the things that can be improved on.
About a minute and a half to go. What's your view on Mars?
On Mars. Well, it's ring fencing innovation, right? You're saying it's only going to be a cluster devoted to the medical sciences, but often there are things that spin off.
Well, it started that way. It's broader than that now.
It's much, much broader.
Yeah.
Here's my basic problem, and this is, you touched on it, Kirk, is who's running this? It's a bureaucratic organization that's trying to be entrepreneurial, and it's the opportunity cost of all the money that's being allocated to this institution. How else could you best use those resources? And I would say, create a fund, create an entrepreneurial investment fund.
Oh, so
that
you
would
think
be
a big bureaucratic body should be investing into startups? I think that's a train wreck way to get
but the opportunity cost of running the organization, if you inject them, you mentioned the Development Bank of Canada gives funds to, or you've sought investments from there. A less complicated structure, in my view, would be much more conducive to achieving the ends that you probably want.
Want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think Mars is not about capital deployment. It's about fostering collaboration between different parties in the ecosystem, and I think that they're doing a good job of that, and they're much broader than medical sciences. We see them in ICT. They're doing great things in education, clean tech. They're across vertical, and to your point, it takes a lot of people to be able to run an organization like that, and certainly there's going to be challenges that they need to surmount, but I think the end goal is an important one, and I'm proud to live in a province that's supporting an initiative like that.
Boy, the Liberals want to find a seat for you.
Yeah.
That is that's the best thing anybody said about Mars in a year.
Exactly.
All right. It's good of all of I'm just teasing you. It's great of all of you to come in tonight and help us with this discussion. Rafael Gomez, excuse me, from the University of Toronto, Sarah Prevet, Kirk Simpson on the other side of the table. You'll notice we don't say entrepreneurs, which I know people hate, right? It's entrepreneurs. So you've got to give it a real
fancy
French sound. Thanks, everybody. This was great.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.